I would also like to structure this talk this afternoon by looking at or using some terms. I don't know how we can define them. Um, uh, Terms and maybe even design principles sometimes. But those are words that I've been dealing with for quite some time, and they all have to do with design. So it's really about, understanding. So trying to get an understanding of what are port cities today. So why they matter. So what are the elements that we need to really understand when it comes to port cities and water in a larger sense? Because I think that port cities and water, they are a very uh, interesting lens to understand the complexity of contemporary territories today, because they encapsulate water territories, the majority of the challenges that our territories dealing with today. So it's definitely about understanding. The porosity is also a term that have been used for quite some time, also with students. And as Joshua was saying, so I am dealing with port cities, and so my perspective, my design perspective is to looking at porosities. So also in the way we look at the regeneration project, I'm always interested in understanding how leftovers or spaces in between, fractures between land and water, how they can those urban cavities, Paula Vigano once explained. So how we can turn those porosities in in new opportunities from a design perspective. I will also show some examples about time and temporality, because I think that's also another important aspect, especially when it comes to design. So the design is also about construction. So it's a time construct, and it's not much about the final outcome. Of course, it's really important to understand how we approach and what kind of final image we produce, but it's about the process. So how we get there, and this is specifically important today when we talk about the transition that can be the energy transition or whatever transition we might have in mind. And the transition itself, it's really about constructing a timeline, so on how to get there. Um, it's Again, it's about stories. So I like stories, I like images, and also with education, we always work with this idea of constructing new imaginaries using the scenario thinking approach. And I will show you a couple of slides later on. And all those elements in the end, they matter because they help us to produce new knowledge. So it's kind of iterative process when we start with understanding, and in the end we came up with new ways of also understanding what we are doing actually. As I said, so port cities are uh, um, a, a design lens in the end. So they are really relevant to understand the majority of complexity we are dealing with today. So why they matter. So when we talk, of course, about port cities, there are many elements that come to our mind. Of course, shipping and global networks are one of them. As I was saying, so ports are all the same all over the globe, and there is a reason for that. So it's always about facilitating connections. It's about flows. It's about making transportation as quick as possible. And this also has, of course, from a logistic and infrastructure perspective, it's their own business, but these also impact territories in different ways. And this is an image from Naples. It's really a small context if compared to maybe a Chinese uh, uh, um, um, context. Uh, but this global dimension, which is again the same all over the places, but they land on spaces in different ways. And in Naples, again, this also generates frictions and fractures between these, the infrastructure development and ways of living behind the port. Because in Naples, for example, they couldn't relocate, for example, port infrastructure, so everything is in the same place, and you have a system, a very dense urban areas that are really in the back of the port. And yeah, you can imagine that this coexistence is very, very complicated. When we talk about port cities, of course, we talk about energy, with again also here a system of infrastructures that are developing within the territories, so even away from the coast, from the sea, but it's also about a collection of leftovers, or what I like to define kind of a landscape in decline, where we have those porosities I was mentioning. So I'm really fascinating by the leftovers of industrial processes and how we can reintegrate those elements into the city, into the metabolic process of the city. When we talk about water, of course, it has also to do with accessing water, who has access to water and who hasn't. We talk about infrastructure and architectures that are embedded in water practices, like this one where people, there is all this practice of going, walking, and accessing the water, and architecture is designed and built to accommodate and facilitate these practices. It's about religions and rituals. It's about mythologies. There is all an imaginary that developed around water and port cities. It's about also accessing water as a public space, and this is we might have also a different understanding of how to use water, and so for me, when we talk about water, it's a holiday, it's summer, it's August, and when I lived in the Netherlands, I mean this also idea of having a bath, for example, with a port container on the horizon was for me kind of strange. But I mean, this kind of existence might change by cultures. It's also a space for not humans, and we tend to forget. So we treat coastal cities, port cities, the rivers, the areas along the river as functional space, but they're also places for modern humans to live in. Water also comes with migration, especially if we think of the Mediterranean. It's a very complicated place to be. And of course, it's about climate change, with ports also playing a significant role in contributing. If we think about pollutions and so on, but they also play an important role today as active actors to also fight climate change. So if we think also about the kind of efforts that Port of Rotterdam is putting, for example, they are really trying to understand how to change the current model of the port to adapt to new conditions. So climate change, but also multi-risk. And so multi-risk is the kind of project I was mentioning before. So feel free to interrupt me whenever you want. So if you think it's too much, too dense, or if you have questions, just let me know. So I've been I'm working now on this project that is trying to understand the landscapes of risk. So try to really capture how risk in coastal cities, water territory. So it's not only about port cities. It's about river cities. It's about lagoons. It's about different geographies of risk that are mainly water related. And we are asking different actors all over Italy, three different transects. So it's Verona, Venice, northern Italy, on the Adriatic. So we have the Po, Delta, and Rimini. It's very over problems with over tourism today. And then we have Naples with three different contexts, also dealing with it's Bagnoli, Castellammare di Stabia, and Naples itself. So it's a very geographical, it's a regional scale where you have different type of ports with different problems, with industry, with an active port, with shipyards, and so on. So all together they present different geographies of risk, and we have been asking people whether there is an alignment between the risk and the perception of risk. And most of the time, people live in under pressure, under risk, and they don't even know, or they just don't care. And we developed different cartographies. This is just an example of the temperature. So to also stress the point that the risk, and in red, it's the areas that are more vulnerable. So this is the transect in Vicenza, for example. This is the Po Delta, where you see the red, it's the urbanized area, and as you can easily imagine, that in the Po Delta it's more agricultural field, so there is no much heat island, for example, but they have a lot of issues, for example, with pollution of the river because of agriculture. So how to deal with those kind of problems, and we kept going on with different contexts. So we developed kind of atlas of with different. So this is again just an example of the Thailand, but we produce maps for social vulnerabilities, for example, or the volcanic risk that is typical of the Campania region, for example, and so on. And then those maps serve to construct what we call the multi-risk map, which is the overlap of the different conditions, and where you and in that sense, mapping is a very powerful tool because it shows what are the most problematic areas where, of course, the complexity of challenges come together. So you see those osmosis. I mean, those kind of areas where water, for example, risk, and the temperature risk, and other risks that depends on the territory. Like here on this side, you have the industrial area, so you have problems with pollution. So all those complexity concentrate along the coast in most of the time. So there are also the places where most of the people want to live, but at the same time, they are the ones subject to the majority of the challenges. So how to deal with this complexity, how to make also people understand and aware that there are different that might live underwater the next 50 years. So and it was a very interesting laboratory. So again, we are finishing the project end of November with the final discussion in Venice. And then we developed together. So we first presented the knowledge framework, and then with them we tried to deconstruct this knowledge framework. So they came up different contexts. We asked them to draw, to identify new areas, to see what was missing in our understanding of the territory. So we came up with this perception map, which is also something we developed with students in Delft, because it's a counter, it's an alternative story. Sometimes there are alignments, sometimes not. And also together we try to turn those perceptions also in kind of strategies or ideas towards the future. So sometimes, kind of creating buffers or a retreat, for example, in some points, and, to try to really live together. So to define together new ways of living with water. And yeah, we aim to bring everything together in a kind of publication that talks about the process. Also try to theorize on this amphibiousness, this amphibious risk, where this amphibious dimension, so we are born as amphibious animals, but then we just forgot. And we prefer to stay on land because of course, we think it's a safer place to be. But we have in our DNA conditions of amphibiousness. So to live, and this, what we're trying also to do with the project is to really go back to this amphibious dimension where we can negotiate all the time, and this staying in between land and water, which is something, of course, that also offer a different perspective. Uh, Port cities and water in a more specific way also has a geopolitical dimension, and so the kind of decisions it always comes to access the water. So accessing the water, it's still today, and we can see from what's happening that it's has a lot to do with accessing bodies of water. Um, and and this is how I also connect to the maritime spatial planning approach. That water, we came from a kind of traditions also in terms of planning that used to look at water as an empty space. So it's a kind of blank canvas, and all our understanding, it's really land-based. It's a land-based. So we are coming from a solid tradition. So we deal with solid stuff. But water today, it's very central to all the majority of the themes, especially when it comes to climate. But it's just to say that water, it's not an empty space, of course. It's a super busy, flows of goods and people. It's energy. Everything actually is populating today what we use to look as kind of spaces in between. But if we look at water as an actor, as a new agent, then also our perspective completely change, and we don't even know what's the land and what's water, because that's actually the point. That there are things that start on land and finish on water, and the other way around. So it's very absurd today that we still keep this kind of separation in the way we look at cities. Sorry, this is in Italian, but it's a fracture from a presentation we had in Rome some time ago, where we presented this maritime spatial planning. Again, it's a tool, it's an approach, it's an instrument that start from a European directive. So all European countries had to deliver those plans for managing and planning the sea. But what's interesting, so if we look at those flows, for example, or also those areas, so this is the water. So the maritime spatial planning divided Italy, for example, in three different bodies of water. And this is already kind of an important shift, because you look at land, look at space from a water perspective, then um, also your understanding of the territory completely changed, because and then the plan was had the goal to set some priorities for the uses of the sea, so not everything should happen at the same time. The plan worked with temporality, and also the vocation of the territory. So Italy, it's like 800 ports or something like that, but every port has a different location, big ports, small ports, and every port is playing a role within this larger perspective. And this is, all the things that we see. But then there are also a system of intangible values that, again, those are really important for the first point I was showing, the understanding. So those are, and water. This is coming from a journey, from a trip we had with students in Morocco last year. So water has also a smell. If we talk about intangible values, it's something we can experience as colors. as a vertical dimension. So it's not just a surface, but it's really about depth. And a map of Venice, of course, when we think about height, tide is an emblematic example of how the perception and the livability of the city change according to the rhythm of and the temporality of water. Water as a sound. But why I'm kind of boring you with all those stuff? It's just to arrive to the point that water is a system. Water and port cities are systems, are larger systems. They are connected to each other, and this also connects to a recent, what for me was recent concept or theory. I don't know how we can call it, approached by this hydrofeminism that put in connection so it's focusing on the bodies, so of bodies of human bodies, but also bodies of water, so that we are also part of a larger system where are connected through water. And again, this also changed the perspective of how we look at space if we think that are part of larger system. So how do we approach all this complexity? And one way is that's also what we have been doing, with my research, but also discussion with students. So is to capture this idea of adaptive strategy, so that we somehow identify and work with strategies that can be adapted. We can be adapted. We should adapt. Strategy should adapt, and this, of course, incorporate also the concept of time, because also people and the communities should adapt. And this is connected to the porosity I was mentioning, this idea of sponge. So the think about cities as with capacity of absorbing water in this sense, and to work with those leftovers. So to look as designers, as architects, so to go into the city and look for potentials. And for me, the potential are the ones that the Italian urbanist Paolo Vigano, defined as urban fractures, as urban cavities that suddenly open in space. Can be, like industry that left, or whatever. So it's a change in the current uh, way of functioning of the city. It might be, I don't know, in 10 years that we don't need ports anymore, or Rotterdam need to change completely the energy system because they run out of oil, and then what to do with 40 kilometers of oil industry. But you will see probably in December. And it's curious because I mean I'm from Naples myself, and this idea of porosity actually originates in Naples. We could say beginning of 20th century, when Benjamin visited the philosopher, the writer visited the city, and he captured this idea of porosity by thinking at Naples. Of course, it has to do with the stone of the city, so it's really a physical dimension, but it mainly has to do with the voids and unexpected dimension, that you might enter a courtyard, you enter a door, and then you develop, you are part of a hidden courtyard that couldn't be possible to capture from the outside. So it's also about the way of living of Neapolitan people, leaving the street, leaving the balcony, being part of kind of theatrality that it's typical. So Joshua was mentioning the wedding. I mean, this is, the ways of living and related to each other. It's very typical of some Italian contexts, and Naples, it's one of them. And then, of course, this concept has been used, by architects, urbanists, to really express this concept of working, within the elements, or to treat architectures and public space, urban spaces as a porous cities, to see what might be opportunities that could be developed. And this is again connected to, what Bano was talking about, liquid modernity, liquid times, and the course itself, connect to liquid territories. Um, that's the concept I was trying also to express at the beginning. So we need to get rid a little bit of this too much land-based approach, and to follow the flow. So we are leaving those liquid time that has to do, of course, with with material, but also with this dealing with uncertainty and the fluidity of some relations that also Manzini described as a politics of every day. So that today everyone has knowledge of something, want to express a point, and this also connect with the urban laboratories that we developed with the project, and where the designers are just not defining from a top down what might be the final decisions, but it's a kind of construction that is developed, in a more horizontal way. But it's really about this living with the age of uncertainty, and we don't. I mean, I don't have an answer, so we don't even have tools to deal with this uncertainty. But of course, we can definitely formulate maybe some new questions, or produce new images. That's what I was also kind of mentioning. I worked a lot with images. I like to think in terms of images, and this uncertainty also impose us to change the current way we communicate and the kind of tools we use. This is again, talking about Paola Vigano and Bernardo Secchi. They are two Italian urbanists. They developed the plan for Antwerp, which, 2006 was very, I think there are still some design principles that can be useful today, but they worked a lot with, so they had to deal with the city where the industry was kind of, leaving, left the city. So the port of Antwerp was far north. So they had to reinvent huge part of the city. So, and they had to deal with those urban fractures and cavities within the urban palimpsest. And they worked with, so this structure plan, that's the reason why I'm proposing is because they call it a plan made of images. So they developed 7 images. And with my thesis, I just worked mainly on Antwerp as a water city, as a port city, and as a porous city. So they divided the plan in those 7 images. For each image, they proposed some questions, and this is exactly what I was mentioning. So those sudden fractures and cavities that open in the urban structure, and they, for a porous city, for example, they were thinking about what happened if Antwerp somehow returned, and the port returned to the city, because they were dealing with huge port infrastructure leaving the city, but you also need to incorporate and to bring back some values of the port, in a different form within the city, and that's kind of regenerating maybe areas, bring people back to some old industrial areas that also become new places for new public space, or new places to just talk to each other, and they also, together with the images, also define a double strategy. So on the left side, it's what they called heart spine, which was a strategy. So they mapped out all the areas, the artifacts, buildings, but also public spaces that were connected to the industry, that needed to be regenerated, to also reconnect and recreate a connection between the city and water. that was completely gone because this was the area of the old port. So for quite some time, so the city just got off, being cut off from water. So they had to reconstruct and rebuild this relation with river. And this one is the soft spine, which is more about the scale of the landscape. So they mapped green areas that could be also used to create new network, new pathways, and what they call the robust infiltration of nature, where they also create new network of green spaces that can also compensate somehow or turn the port on a larger perspective, a new also green, let's say, a new green infrastructure. But so what are adaptive strategies? So again, it can be a lot of things, and I will just show you a few images that are mainly coming from the Dutch context. Maybe some of those I really invite you to visit during your stay in the Netherlands. So adaptive strategy. So of course, one way to decline this adaptive strategy is about reusing the whole industrial heritage. So in Rotterdam, it's an interesting laboratory where this coexistence between old industrial artifacts and new ways of living can really come to life. So those on the basement is hold port storage warehouses, and lately they've been adding to the urban palimpsests. So those are whole housing. So in the Netherlands there is huge pressure on housing, and they just came up with this idea. But we can talk about the result, but in principle this idea of reusing heritage and giving a new life, a new purpose. So this is on the opposite side, so that there are those two identical warehouses, and one is used today as a museum of migration. And I really invite you to visit, especially this stair, which is a very interesting journey through the layers of the history. Adaptive strategy is also about managing flows. It's about reintegrating, again, leftovers into the metabolism of the city. So it's about circularity. So this is an example of the Keuvel in Amsterdam. Again, can be also it's a quite old project, but still very can say a lot about how we deal with old industrial areas. And it's used, so they adapted some ships and they made them into artist atelier and offices, and there are new public space. And this was a land, a very polluted land, that this company and collective decided to regenerate, like with vegetation, with plants. So it was a kind of, again, talking about temporality, was a plan of like 10 years to give this place back to the city, and also connect to a movement, about urban metabolism. Of course, that is it's recent in the 60s and 70s, but this was a recent, well, not recent anymore, was 2014 or 15, I don't remember, but was this exhibition on urban metabolism in Rotterdam, where they also presented those fascinating map about the port of Rotterdam and all the different dimension of with waste and with goods, with people, all the flows that also make the Rotterdam the city that we see today. Also asking people to reflect on how we could turn those flows into something different. And again, it's about constructing a timeline. So we should, by keep in mind what might be an adaptive strategy, but we really need to be careful about the people we involved, and the kind of reasonable timeline we construct in order to get there. So temporality also has to do with temporary uses. And again, Rotterdam is an interesting laboratory for experimentation. And those are images from installation. It's a public, it's a huge installation. So they built those huge stairs, and they use the green the rooftop as new public spaces, and you could go through those stairs, use those rooftops, and you so they the MVDV, so they proposed a completely new perspective, because you could have a look at the city from a different perspective, or walk on a bridge that was normally there, and you can get a completely different. So you construct also new ways of relations and new opportunities for public spaces to be. And talking about the timeline, so this is an example of students' work for some time ago, and they were asked to rethink the spaces, but also the economies and the infrastructure of the port of Rotterdam. And so the first things they came up with was constructing a timeline where it's not something you build from scratch, but in order to regenerate the port from the inside, you need, kind of step-by-step approach where you start with, maybe populating some areas with new greenery and new energy, and then, step by step you can get to the final point where the port also become a place for new economies to take a place. It's about sponge garden, again, experimentation to create new kind of ecology. So this is really about also creating space for humans and not humans to be. It's about strategies like tidal park, where again in Rotterdam. So maybe I can also, later on, well, you will have this presentation, so you can also map out those locations in Rotterdam and have a look, because most of those places have changed, not much, but have changed. And this is again a tidal park in Rotterdam, where also a strategy for climate adaptation also become an opportunity for public space. So you have a place that can accommodate water, but when there is no need, those stairs and those places are also used for people, as a kind of public space for people, but also for not necessarily humans. It's also adapting to new ways of living. Well, in the Netherlands, it's not so new anymore, but again, those are popping up quite a lot now, with those new floating houses, which also is a change in the way we perceive living. So it's adapting to live with or on water, and it has to do not only with living but also with production. So this is a floating farm where they are also again extending the life of the city into the water, and also imagining new ways of production. But again, here the cycles are not completely closed, so there are also other issues to be taken into account. Where those animals are coming from, and so on. But they are trying to close the cycle as much as possible. So images, but also scenarios. So as I was saying, so we work with students a lot with provocative images, provocative future, even impossible future sometimes. So again, we can debate about what are scenarios, but what I like of scenarios and the way we use scenarios, it's not much about predicting the future. So don't trust people that say, we have the data, so in 10 years, that's what's gonna happen, because that's that's not the reality of things. So I like to think about scenarios as kind of exploratory moments. So it's places where we can explore and speculate about possible, plausible, even impossible futures. So in the end, they are kind of investigation where everything, can be can happen, but at the same time, everything is under challenge. So it's really about constructing images that might also be contrasting to each other. So it's about proposing some trajectories, but it's more about hypothesis than real facts. So in the end, scenarios are kind of stories. That's why I like them, because they are so the kind of discussion that the scenario and image can trigger is much more fascinating than the final, kind of destination. So it's really about kind of discussion you can generate by proposing a strong image. And that's again what we also been trying to do with our students. Here, just some random projects and examples that we have been developing with students at TU Delft. So adaptive strategy. So it's a small course. It's not a really a design studio, but I like to think as a studio which is dealing with urban and design issues. So we normally structure this course. So the courses at UDELFT are based on quarters. So we have courses of 10 weeks. So they are very intense, depending on the hours. But and we for adaptive strategies we mainly structure in two parts. So the first part it's more about the exploration, the understanding. So we give them we invite lectures. So we provide as much content as possible. Sometimes also too much, but then they process and they get an understanding of what's out there in terms of literature, but also kind of challenges that port cities are facing. And then the second part is more about design, also that we might invite people from the outside to propose tools or innovative ideas to deal with the future. Basically, that's what design is about. And we use combination of different tools and materials. So we work with perception maps, where it's very basic drawings, but most of the time they come to class with no idea what port cities are, and we ask them to design a port city from scratch. And this is an interesting tool because they are forced to use maybe memory or to bring to the table the components and elements that they think might characterize a port city. Sometimes it's really about very basic elements, the ship and the buildings and water and the flows. But what we like is the kind of relation and the out of scale of elements, because this also gives a lot information about what for them are kind of priorities maybe, or what they think might be more relevant in a port city than other elements. And all of this, it's really about yeah, generate kind of new interpretative tools. And this is a recent book from Carola. It's about the Port City Atlas. I don't know if you heard of it, but I think and I hope so. And this is also it's an atlas. It's a collection of mainly European maps that are being collected using open access data. So also the narrative, of course, it takes into account the fact that the data all open access. But then you can get an understanding of of ports, their vocation, their relation between water and land, port and city, what are the functions that populate ports. And I think it's a very interesting tool to also get familiar with mapping. And here again, some examples from our students. So this is here we run the course in Naples, and this group of students, rather than, for example, fight climate change, so they decided to not take any action and to accommodate water. This also meant that part of, well, completely all the port disappeared, and also part of the city, the historical city, went underwater. And for them, this was an opportunity to rethink the structure of the port, not as kind of rigid infrastructure, but more kind of flexible, movable, modular infrastructure that could be, moving along the coast where needed. This is Venice, and also in this case, students decided to not take action and just, they entitled so let water coming in, which partially it's also happening, but they were trying to speculate about what might be, the future of a basilica in San Marco, where you have maybe also different type of tourism. It's very, kind of long shot, but it was just a way to speculate about what kind of future might be out there in case we don't take any action. And we talk about a lot of water, and we also tend to forget the drought. So water, it's also about lack of water, and in this case also this Venice. So they were also imagining what if water, what if Venice lose, there is no water anymore in Venice. So and so they were also reusing the water channels, so the canals as new green corridors. And again, this it's really about provocation and provide new perspective on the city. Maps is one tool, but we also work with sections. Also in this case, it's a lot about also perception, and if I remember correctly, it was a section from the city of Trieste, and so also working with the vertical dimension also gives you an idea of relation between the water and the land, especially if we think about what we don't see. So the infrastructure, the canals and the pipelines and so on. Most of the projects are, in this case, was about connecting the two sides of river. This is Dunkirk again, and also using and going back to this idea of porosity, so how we can reconnect the two sides of the river, but also how we can extend our life into the water, and also creating and using water as a new, let's say, public space, and what kind of new opportunities might be out there. Also challenging, tools like artificial intelligence. So this again, the port of Dunkirk, where they were creating new huge dunes to protect the city, but again, at the same time, also imagining a new kind of port infrastructure that might be more conversation with nature and the city. Um, this is Morocco. One of I don't know how I am with time, but we are kind of I'm approaching to the end of the presentation. So this is the urban archipelago. This is mainly dealing with water, as I was saying at the beginning, and the last 3 years we have been working on the different cities in Morocco, from Casablanca to Tangier, Tetuan, Saleh, Rabat. So, and we also organized field trips with students, and that's a very fascinating place. It's northern Africa. It's in between two bodies of water, so Atlantic and the Mediterranean. But at the same time, we can say that the Morocco is very away from water. So it's for historical reasons, but you feel that there is a detachment between yet people and water itself. And this was very from the beginning captured by students, and so most of the stories were trying to also bring people back to water. And also this course has kind of similar structure where we have, from the understanding to um, identifying new ways we can narrate water, this relation with water towards the design itself. And I selected three examples, three because I think they are very fascinating stories. So this is about the sound of water, and so the students walking through, I think it was Tetuan. So they were trying to capture the sound of water and also try to spatialize these um, ah, now we lost the video. I had the video here, but I lost it because of PDF. But well, it doesn't matter. But they were mapping out the different sound of water based on the different places of the city, also connecting the space to a more social cultural dimension because not everyone had access to some specific sound, and this might tell or give information about what kind of social class you are. For example, if you are close to a fountain or you are close to the sea or whatever. So there is kind of alignment between spatial dimension and social cultural one. And they also, from the beginning, try to reflect what kind of shape might has the sound of water. So they translate in a very philosophical way. So they translated those sounds into special intervention that mainly were focusing on creating new opportunities for public space into the city. A second project, which is more about narrating water, and I'm also showing because I think it might be nice to also see the different materials that we have been producing with students. So this turned out in kind of catalog, and it's a catalog made of different materials, with different papers and different format. And so this group was really taking a position of the water itself. So they rewrote the history and also the story of the river from the river perspective. So they kind of humanized the river, so that if you go through this catalog, you heard stories, poetry, where the river is kind of describing all the actions made by humans. They covered up the river, so they interrupted, they changed the flow of the river. So it's an attack to human actions, also represented by this blood. So this color, which is really the suffering of the river, and capable of finding its own way towards the sea. And they capture this story in this catalog, showing different materials and informations, also mapping out the vegetation, the richness of the ecologies along the river. So they, this kind of was kind of again a provocation about what kind of new stories and a new position we can take when it comes to design. Because if we take a different position, we might arrive to a completely different conclusion. And this is a more, let's say, conventional way of dealing with design, with this also, catalog format of typified solutions. But the story here, it's really about, so they worked on the hammam. I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of thermal thing in Morocco. It's very common, but they all, of course, to function, they need water. And this group of students were imagining how those hammam might work with extreme weather conditions where might be no water or might be no water for some specific time of the year. But how to keep the social dimension of the hammam, because in addition to the function of, like massage and the experience of water, they also work as a social gathering, especially for women where they normally don't go to, they don't live public life in Morocco. So they gather in those hammams. So they also have a specific social dimension. So how to preserve this social dimension if there is no water? So they kind of imagining how those places in some moments of the year might also work differently, like as exhibition or places for learning on museums and whatever. Um, so we worked quite a lot with students with this catalog format. This is Trieste. So together on the left, it's a map of all port and water related activities and how those some of those functions gone lost, and how we can also turn this mapping of the existing into possible strategies for the future, where we might also think about different ways of living with and on or even underwater. And again, the main focus, it's a public space, so how we can think places in the sea, on the water, maybe close to the port, but can also play a role as a social places to bring people together. We work with exhibitions, so most of the time we end our courses, we push them to also think how we can represent and tell a story through exhibitions, which again it's another exercise, but I think it's very useful to also condense and shrink stories into a way that can be captured in exhibition. And that's what we did also with one in Morocco, for example. Yeah, so let's say that's this is my last slide. So I was also trying to come up with some questions that you can easily go through them. We can discuss them together. But this is just to maybe reflect on the importance of always having a specific lens, a specific angles when we look at space. And I like water, I like port cities because they are, again, a very peculiar perspective to say something about the future of our cities. And maybe it's an open question whether you are familiar with this porosity and this idea of working between spaces. That's also something you are experiencing. Um, the dimension of ecology, so to really try to incorporate and design and think about ports, um, not much as infrastructures, as functional infrastructure, as a functional enclave, as machines, but really as a tool to also bring new ecological values. I don't know, I don't have an answer to this question, but that's also for you to think about the scale, the temporal dimension, the people, the actors that you want to incorporate. We had students, for example, that say, no, we have to bring fishes to the table. So they are the actors. So if we think about the marine ecosystem, so how do we represent them? And yeah, and the last one, it's really about the image itself and whether you also work with images and how far you think you can go with a provocative scenario, with a provocative image, keeping in mind that the images and the production of images, it's very important to trigger kind of discussion and conversation. So I don't know if I went too long, but yeah, thank you so much.